Flow Unleashed.
How do you handle yourself during conflict? How do you navigate your agenda under immense pressure and stay centered as opposed to becoming too emotional? And how can you prospect rather than protect yourself and engage rather than walk away when things get difficult? Welcome to Flow Unleashed. I'm Cameron Norsworthy, and this is your podcast for human performance. Conflict surrounds us every day. Whether it's a disagreement with a partner, a difficult client, or our own fatigue clouding our own judgment, conflict is an unavoidable part of an engaged life. It touches our jealousy, anger, frustration, envy, and ego, constantly triggering emotions that shape how we think, feel, and interpret the world around us. But how aware are we of these triggers and their influence on our minds and perceptions? Our capacity to handle conflict often feels steady until external pressures or fear escalate. Suddenly, that threshold is tested, sometimes pushed to its breaking point. Consider this story of a Zen Buddhist priest who chose an unconventional path. Known as a talented writer with an unshakable curiosity for truth, he stepped away from the monastic life to immerse himself in society's chaos. He sought to shed light on injustice during a time when rampant violence and corruption overshadowed morality. In writing for prominent newspapers and magazines, he documented the truth on the ground, often challenging the powerful mob responsible for the nation's unrest. This brought immense risk. The mob, angered by his unrelenting pursuit of truth, pressured him to stop. He found himself in a storm of external conflict, facing opposition from a group that represented everything he opposed. And at times, the personal stakes felt overwhelming. Yet fully aware of the danger, he didn't back down. Following his unwavering commitment to truth and accountability, he made the bold decision to sit face to face with the very people threatening his life. Most of us won't face conflicts involving life-threatening danger. Yet, in smaller significant ways, we all face our own difficult moments. Confronting a colleague, addressing tension at home, or navigating heated disagreements, how we respond to these moments shapes our relationships, influences our happiness, and can define our personal and professional growth. Leadership, like a strong marriage or effective teamwork, often comes down to handling tough conversations. Can we remain open, composed, and engaged in the heat of conflict? Can we explore the psychology of disagreement and master the art of effective communication under pressure? Joining us today is the person in my earlier story, Jake Adelstein. Jake, an American journalist, author, and former Zen Buddhist priest, built a career reporting on Japan's infamous Yakuza mafia. Jake's first-hand experiences have given him a unique perspective on handling conflict, staying composed in high-stakes situations, and the power of conversational receptiveness. Jake's career spans decades of investigative reporting in Japan, exposing corruption, injustice, and the underworld. His work on human trafficking and organised crime has been featured in the Daily Beast, The Independent, The Guardian, and he is the author of Tokyo Vice, an American reporter on the police beat in Japan, and his latest book, The Last Yakuza, Life and Death in the Japanese Underworld. In today's conversation, we'll dive into Jake's remarkable story and the lessons he's learned about conflict, lessons we can all apply to ourselves, whether we're leading teams, strengthening relationships, or striving for resilience in challenging times.
Flow Unleashed.
This chat with Jake has been remastered from several years ago. I imagine gaining the Yakuza's trust but at the same time writing truthful, interesting pieces on them must have been a difficult balancing act. What dangerous situations did you get into in order to uncover the truth?
When you write about something that the police have announced, they don't care because the police have announced it because everybody writes about it. But in the classic way in Japan, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. When you write about something that they don't want in print, that nobody else has written about, then you start to get some blowback because they figure if they can shut you up, that you will cease to write about these things and that the police may not investigate or let the investigation go and they will get away with what they've done. The first time I really realized that this was an issue was in Saitama. There was a series of banks mostly run for Zainichi, meaning Japanese Koreans who were allied with South Korea rather than North Korea. So these banks were called Shogun. And Saitama Shogun was going to go under. They had reached the point where they had more debts than earnings, and a lot of that money had been lost by loans to Yakuza, many of those Yakuza who were also Korean Japanese. That's not a huge secret in Japan. Many people in the underworld, I'd say maybe a third of the Yakuza are Korean Japanese because Japan really discriminates against their Korean population. They were brought over slave labor. Japan colonialized them years ago. And for many Koreans growing up after the Second World War, your job options were Korean barbecue, love hotel, pachinko parlor, Yakuza. And since the Yakuza was kind of a meritocracy, many went into the Yakuza. So by writing about this bank going under, which was more of a financial news story, but also writing about the fact that many of the bad loans were made to organized crime members and their associates, that aroused the ire of the Inagawa Kai, which was the principal organized crime group in Saitama that had eaten into this bank. So I got death threats to my house, and it was about that point that the Yomiuri Shimbun decided to move me to Tokyo. I had a lot of problems getting the story into the newspaper about these savings and loans companies going down. One was because there was this kind of attitude like, who cares about a Korean savings and loan going under? It'll all be covered anyway. And the Koreans in Japan, they're kind of a minority. It's not a big famous bank. And the argument I made was, well, millions of dollars of tax money is going to be used to bail out this bank. And the fact that these illegal and questionable loans were made to organized crime is a huge issue. It's a compliance issue. It's a bad example. It's a problem that we're ultimately going to pay for. So, I wrote a couple articles about it. It took years to really get to the bottom of this story. One of the stories I spent the most time on with probably the least social impact, but one that I felt was important. And the reward was that I had angry Yakuza threatening me, and from the Tokyo office, Kiyotaki-san, who is the number 2 in the National News Department, came down and said, great work on that article. You seem to be not welcome in Saitama anymore, so we're taking you up to Tokyo, and we're putting you back on the police beat. You'll be covering Kabukicho, which is the 4th district. So in 1999, suddenly I was out of Saitama and then in Tokyo in the big leagues, right? And so in 1999, suddenly I was in charge of covering the Shinjuku police station and all the stations in that area. It was a lot like being on the police beat again. And of course, Kabukicho is rife with organized crime groups. So once again, I was back doing that. But I really have not had too many unpleasant encounters with the Yakuza. I've had talks at their offices that were hostile, and I felt anger and tension. But most of the time, because they are organizations with a public image to obtain, they don't want to attack reporters, and they don't want trouble. They don't want to do something that's going to interfere with their business without some kind of tangible reward in the process. So that is a certain amount of protection. But after having this period of time when I was under police protection because I insisted on following up a story about a Yakuza boss who got a liver transplant in the United States and 3 other Yakuza bosses that got liver transplants in the United States, I decided that I didn't really want to experience that anymore. So in recent years, if I'm writing something that has to do with organized crime, and it is a scoop, and it is going to make people angry, I either write it under a pen name for a weekly magazine, since they have lots of lawyers and lots of staff, and they're too big to tango with, so I can sort of hide in the background. Or before I write the article, I call someone up in the organization and I tell them, like, I'm going to write this article. For example, about 4 or 5 years ago, I wrote an article that the vice chairman of Japan's Olympic Committee, a guy named Tanaka, was a close associate of several Yakuza bosses over the years. And there was a picture of him with the current head of the Yamaguchi-gumi. I mean, it's the equivalent of the vice chairman of the Rugby Association in Australia showing up in a picture with the most infamous gangster in Australia. You know, it's a pretty sensational picture, and there was definitely an association between these two. And especially you have this guy who's on a committee that is going to be overseeing billions of dollars worth of construction. That's a huge problem. And the photo and the connection I knew was going to be trouble. I knew that there had been 2 journalists writing for sort of a right-wing scandal tabloid that had tried to write about it and had their knees broken with baseball bats. No one ever caught the person responsible. And I already have a bad knee from karate, and I was like, I don't want to be that person. So I took the article to Vice News, and I said, this is a good article, but I need a promise that you will publish this within 24 hours after I start asking questions. I have everything done. I just need to ask Tanaka what he has to say. But once I ask him, that sends out an alert to everyone that someone is working on this story. And if they think they can stop the story, they may do something stupid. In the Yakuza world, there's this phrase called kuki ga hairu, which means like air gets in. And I think it actually relates to shooting yourself up with meth, that if you wait too much, you hesitate, or you don't shoot it right, that air gets in the needle and that can be fatal. So in a sense, the longer you give someone to brew about something, the more likely they are to do something drastic and stupid because they think on it or they plot. So in the case with writing something controversial about the Yakuza, something that's not in the paper, something that the police haven't announced, I make a courtesy call. You reach out to someone high in the organization and you tell them over the phone, I'm writing this article. I'm not asking you for your permission, but as a courtesy, I'm telling you what's going to be in it. And I'm not even asking for comment. I'm just letting you know. And most of the time, there's not trouble if you do that, because they can't stop it. And at least you've warned them so they can be prepared, so they can at least tell their boss what is going on. In the case of this Yakuza Olympics article, the person I was speaking to asked me, can you please edit the photo so that no one sees his missing finger? Because he's very sensitive about that. And I was like, I can't edit the photo. I can say what a nice boss he is, because, you know, as Yakuza bosses go, Tsukasa Shinobu, who's the current leader of the Yamaguchi-gumi, is a nice boss. And that's the best I can do. And so that went smoothly. But basically, Yakuza tend to be sort of sociopathic, violently aggressive people. They can be charming, and they can be erudite, and they can also be reasonable and logical, but most of them are very violent people with a hair trigger, and that makes dealing with them incredibly stressful. I think in 2009, I went to see a good source in that world, who was really high on meth, and for whatever reason, what I said to him triggered his paranoia, and he beat the shit out of me. I mean, it turned into a brawl between him and me. I walked away, but not without, I kind of limped away. He was in worse shape than I was. And the dilemma in that case is, well, he's my source. So if I turn him in, I go to the cops, he's got meth in his system, then he's going to go to jail. Then I made an enemy for life. You know, and you have to ask yourself, well, was that intended to hurt me, or was that just someone on meth having paranoid delusions? And the conclusion, it was someone on meth having paranoid delusions. So, you know, I just left it at that.
Interesting. As a Zen Buddhist priest, I imagine a lot of your training and your beliefs and values and thoughts contrary to a lot of what you're reporting on as a journalist. How do you...
Well, it certainly makes the job harder. I spent most of college living in a Zen Buddhist temple in Toshimaku, which is sort of blue-collar, poor neighborhood of Tokyo, near Ikebukuro. A lot of crime, not exactly I wouldn't call it a slum, but it's not the greatest of places. I don't think Toshimaku will ever be hip. And I studied Zen Buddhism under my teacher for 20, 25 years. And definitely the training helped. It helps you stay calm. It's a very good thing to have done Zazen for a long time, because sometimes if you can remember to breathe, if you can remember to center yourself and be completely there, it's extremely helpful in staying calm and sensing what is happening and moving with the conversation, moving with the moment, and not losing your cool. And losing your cool is no good with these people, because they try to provoke you. They try to provoke you all the time. I mean, a conversation with a Yakuza is like having a conversation with the worst ex-girlfriend you ever had in your life, who wants to fight. She wants to have a quarrel. She's waiting for you to slip up, for you to say something. And if you apologize, it makes the situation even worse. So it's a very tense thing. But the hardest part of being an investigative journalist and being a Zen Buddhist priest is that as a Zen Buddhist priest, you have to take these 10 vows, what they call the 10 grave precepts. And many of these vows make it hard to do business the way that you've done them before. For example, and I remember having a long discussion in 2017 with my teacher about this, on whether I could even take the vows. I said, I think vow number 6 or number 7 is that you cannot criticize other people. And I'm like, how can I possibly be a journalist and be a Zen Buddhist priest? Because criticizing people and institutions is what I do all the time. And he said in his gravelly voice, if you're writing the truth, it's not criticism, you're just writing the truth. and I was like, okay, that's okay. That works. And I'm like, well, what about this thing? You can't praise yourself. And he was like, well, putting your name on an article isn't praising yourself. You're just writing that you wrote the article. And I said, well, what about this part about not lying? And he's like, well, why is that a problem? And I'm like, if you ask a dishonest person an honest question, they're not going to give you a straight answer. When bluffing and insinuation and misdirection are all part of what it takes to get an answer from someone. Also, you can't burn your sources. And he said, well, you'll just have to learn to ask questions straight up. And if they don't answer honestly, then you'll deal with it. So it is hard. You learn all these tricks to get people to tell you the truth that you learn from detectives and stuff. Bluffing is a huge one. You imply that you know more than you do. Or you say, so-and-so says this. Well, you can't do that if so-and-so didn't say that. So it makes my job a little more tricky. But fortunately for me, in the primarily since 2011, the Yakuza's power and numbers have dwindled so much that the amount of time I spent writing about them is a tenth of what it was compared to 10 years before. I mean, the last long article I wrote about the Yakuza was the Yamaguchi-gumi, which is in Kobe. It has a fortress. It's like an entire city block. That's where the headquarters are. I mean, everybody knows where it is. And for many years, starting around 1979, 78, they held a Halloween party for the neighborhood children. And Halloween isn't normally celebrated in Japan, but the Canadian school used to be nearby. And after Canadian kids kept knocking on the door demanding candy, and the Yakuza first gave them money in envelopes, not knowing what to do, eventually realized under the tutelage of the third generation leader that they should probably be nicer to the kids and started throwing a Halloween party for them. And this year, law was passed that made it illegal for Yakuza to give candy to children. I'm not making this up. So no more giving candy to kids, no more inviting them onto the premises. And that was the end of Yakuza Halloween. So I wrote a very long piece about how this tradition began and how people in the neighborhood felt that it was ending. And pointed out that all the Yakuza do horrible things and you don't want children emulating them. This was probably one of the few good things that they did. And in the effect that it made them interact with people in the neighborhood, it was kind of a restraint. And personally, I will miss those Halloween parties because there was an Indian family in the neighborhood. There are many Indian families in the neighborhood. I used to borrow their kids and go to the Halloween party. It's kind of fun to see all the Yakuza. And if anyone recognized me, they didn't say anything.
living and working in a way that's congruent is one of the most challenging things in life, especially when we're in environments and contexts that may ordinarily be contradictory to what we may hold dear. And I was privileged enough to listen to the Dalai Lama speak one time, and he talked about his relationship with George W. Bush and them being great friends, which was a huge surprise to me. And yeah, I came away with the message that engagement is more important than disengagement, and we can always operate in a manner that's congruent even in those complex situations. And I imagine in your life and world you've had many phone calls, interviews, situations where you've had to tread lightly, manage your internal conflicts, but also get the best information you can at that particular time. And I wonder what role flow has had in that, in the sense of you being able to really become immersed in that moment and tread that tightrope really well.
Well, it is funny that you mentioned sort of the conflict between engagement and non-engagement, because and the Dalai Lama, because in 2008, once I was working on a story that I didn't really want to write. And I figured the only way I could clarify it was to actually speak to the Dalai Lama. So I hunted him down and interviewed him guerrilla style on a United Airlines flight. I still have a picture of it. It was very nice. He had a very firm handshake. I'll send you the picture. And I got to ask him my question, which was about an issue with the Dalai Lama in Japan. And his answer was very, very good. And I'll probably wait until he passes away because I don't want to give away too much. But it was also about engagement versus non-engagement. So that makes me smile when you mention that. He's quite a character. And he still has my noise canceling headphones, which is interesting because I finally cornered the Dalai Lama. I'm on this plane and came out of the bathroom. And I to get this flight, I had to really jump on to the last minute. So I decided I would shave in the bathroom, but I didn't have a very good razor. And so, while the flight attendant wasn't looking, I sat down next to the Dalai Lama, to the horror of everyone. His bodyguard didn't seem to mind. And as I was talking to Dalai Lama, he was like, "You are bleeding on my robe," which was true. I was bleeding from my face. And he's like, when I shave, sometimes I cut my head because if I'm not careful. So the secret is you must shave very slow. And he said, "These robes are red, so it's no problem." So we had this nice talk. And the flight attendant came over and he politely shooed her away, which was nice. So after we were talking for several minutes, I had on these Audio Technics noise canceling headphones that at the time, 2008, were pretty advanced. And Dalai Lama pointed at my headphones. And I said, "Are those noise canceling headphones?" He says, "Those are very nice. Sometimes when I get on the helicopter, they give them to me because they are very noisy on the helicopter, but I do not have any of my own." And he just let this pregnant pause there. And I was like, oh, Your Holiness, would you like these noise canceling headphones? And I was like, "Here, try them on." And put them on, I showed him how to use them. And he's like, "Oh, these are very nice." And I'm like, "Okay, please, Your Holiness, since I bothered you on this plane, please take them, but you have to share them with your bodyguard." And the bodyguard was like, gave me a thumbs up. And the Lama was like, "Oh." And it wasn't like a Japanese thing like, "Oh, no, I couldn't." He was like, "Oh, thank you so much." And so I ended up getting to talk to the Dalai Lama for 20 minutes and got a photo with him. And then he got my headphones with the noise canceling. It wasn't like I expected to get them back because I did offer them to him. Yeah. And a gadget magazine, because he's really into gadgets. Like he likes weird gadgets like electronics and mechanical things. So I brought him a Japanese gadget magazine. I plan to give him the gadget magazine. I didn't plan to give him the headphones. Okay, so let's get back into the flow. It's just an interesting, funny story that I was thinking about the other day. The flow works two ways. Since primarily my job is to get people to talk about things that they don't want to talk about, that they don't want people to know. And in order to do that, the best way is if you can find something to appeal to them that makes them feel like it's in their best interest to speak to you, or that not speaking to you will put them in a even worse situation. And that requires quickly getting a sense of who that person is and what motivates them. Most of the time you have time to prepare. But in some senses, that skill only comes from meeting many, many people and learning to recognize a slight timbre in the voices, certain types of people, listening to the way they use words and getting a sense of what motivates them and what their sense of honor is, or if they have a sense of honor. And ideally too, if you want people to feel good about telling you the truth. Someone who has a sense of right and wrong sometimes actually feels good to unburden themselves of the things that they've done wrong, to tell you something. So it's such a strange alchemy to when you're speaking to someone, to get the sense of where they are. And the longer you have to chat with them, the more you can get a sense of where they are in the world, what their viewpoints are, what they understand. For example, if you're talking to a Yakuza and you're trying to get information about them, and let's say they're doing something slightly unethical, maybe slightly, but not horribly unethical, but just kind of a bit business making them. If you talk to them about, I was working on this case involving these hosts who are, putting their female customers in debts and then convincing them to take out loans from loan sharks and basically sexually enslaving them. They're just really scum. And you get the Yakuza talking about how horrible hosts are, because most Yakuza really hate hosts. They feel like these sort of male entertainers, companions, gigolos, whatever you want to call them, are like the scum of the earth. So you can get them talking about how terrible these people are. They feel a little less bad talking about the things that they've done because it's a higher class of crime. Or if you take the mindset that this person has absolutely no sympathy for the victim, and you sort of can get into their mind, it's like, yeah, if these people weren't so greedy, I know they wouldn't have fallen for this scheme in the first place. What did they think that you could actually, that if you invested in this shady company and evaded taxes, that you would really make money? If they hadn't been so greedy or been willing to pay their taxes like other people, they would have never got themselves in this fix. I remember having this conversation once when I was working on this story about the Yakuza crime boss who got a liver transplant in the United States. And I was talking to one of the people involved, and someone who I'd known for a while. And the conversation was going fairly well. And at one point, we sort of reached a stage where I realized they weren't going to say much more. They didn't want to say much more. And it wasn't a bluff, but I realized this is the time to just lay it out before I get kicked out. I put my cards on the table, which was, this is what I know. I'm going to write this story about how your organization made a deal with this Yakuza boss to get them into the United States and was screwed out of the information they were promised. And it makes the organization look bad, and it makes you look bad. But I would like to hear your side of the story, because if I knew your side of the story, then I could write a more balanced thing, and maybe it isn't what it appears to be. And that opportunity to explain yourself, right? Here's your last chance to explain yourself, because here's what I know. This is all that's going to go out. So if you want to put in your extenuating circumstances, now is the time. And that worked very well. Flow is interesting. Sometimes the flow is you follow the conversation, you laugh, you get along, and then you slowly steer the conversation towards the topic that you want to get into. And sometimes flow works in the senses that you match with the person, then you just stop. You break the flow and you leave this huge silence there, which is, everything's been going forward smoothly, and then you stop and you say, wait, and you pull back. And that break in the flow, in the conversation, that long silence that is painful for most people, often is what encourages people to talk. I don't know if this fits into your idea of flow, but there's this idea in Taoism, in the Tao Te Ching, which is part of the philosophical basis of Zen Buddhism, that there is a sort of flow to the universe, that there's sort of a harmony, waves of energy, right? And that you need to recognize what those are and sort of flow with them. And not something like The Secret, where this is what I want, this is what I imagine, but more like, I am open to many things that will take me to where I need to go on this story or this event. And you relax a little bit. And sometimes in that moment of relaxation, the inspiration comes to you, or you run into the person that you need to meet. And that's counterintuitive, right? How can being a lazy ass actually benefit my work? But sometimes it does. And I don't know how to describe when you get that sense that this is the place I need to be right now. The best example I have is, I think, 2003. Normally, at that time, I was covering organized crime control in Tokyo for the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department. But there had been a murder of a Malaysian businessman in my neighborhood. Like, they dumped the body that's 300 meters from my house. And so because it was so close to where I lived, my boss was like, okay, you're going to be the one casing the area for 3 days. So normally, as a police reporter not covering homicide, I don't case neighborhoods, right? That's the job of the homicide guys. But in this case, since I lived so close and I knew the neighborhood ostensibly, that was my job. So after about 3 days, it dawned on me that the body had been dumped there, but he probably was killed somewhere else. Nobody had seen anything. Someone had seen a van drive up and toss out a body, which matched my conclusions that he hadn't been killed there. But I was like, this is a colossal waste of time. So I went to a bar in Roppongi called Propaganda, and I was having a smoke and talking to the bartender, Yasu-san. And he asked me what I'd been up to. And I told him about this case I was working on and this Malaysian guy who'd been thrown out of a van, who'd been stabbed to death. And his face went white because he turned out to have been the only eyewitness. So he was living in Ayase, and the van was parked out in front of his house. And he heard noises from the van. He looked out the window, and the Malaysian guy was tied up in the seat across from the driver's seat. And suddenly he saw like blood spurting, and he ran down and tried to open the doors of the van, and the van took off. And then they dumped the body probably 10 kilometers or less than maybe 4 kilometers away in my neighborhood. And I thought that is really too much, but he had the police detective's business cards, and he told me all the details, and he told me details that the police had told him. And so the most interesting thing is that one of the cops who talked to him was from the credit card fraud squad, which was also one of the areas that I was responsible for. I held organized crime as my territories, that department, and also the credit card fraud squad was part of that. So I went to the head of that division. I said, hey, look, why are you investigating the murder of this Malaysian? And he was pretty shocked, but I guess he assumed that I must have talked to another cop. And he told me, well, this Malaysian guy who was stabbed to death, he came into the country with 400 blank credit cards. So he was probably part of a credit card fraud scheme. Something must have gone wrong and he had been killed. So collecting all that information, we were able to write a story identifying him, what had happened to some extent, and what was the background of this case. And I always thought, that's really interesting. Like, my goofing off is actually what got me the story, not doing the work. I mean, I did case the neighborhood, but it was that random decision to just go drink at the bar at this night. And he wasn't he wasn't working at the bar every night. And so some things are like that. You're working on a story, you're trying to identify a company, whether it's a front company or not, and you have to sort of let your mind go from what's in front of you to make the other connections. And that intuitive process is very hard to explain. I mean, it's much easier to tell people, okay, here's a checklist. If you're trying to identify a Yakuza front company, here's the 27 things that you look for. Here's the databases that you search, and maybe you can figure it out. But it doesn't always work like that.
I think there's a really interesting conversation there in terms of when we slow down, we start to see opportunity. When we slow down, we start to become present, we start to listen, and we start to see. Where's that line between self-determined, intrinsic motivation and becoming an automated script and becoming a consequence of our predetermined agenda and becoming so blinded by this thing that we need to tick or do or achieve that we miss it.
Right. Yeah, you talk about having an agenda, sort of predetermined agenda, and being blind to these things. In Zen Buddhism, we talk about seeing things like it was for the first time, because that is, you are open to things. You're putting aside your confirmation bias and seeing things for the first time without preconceptions, without judgments. And that is so important when you're having a conversation with someone. That ability to do that, to not decide this person must be like this or this person must be like that. Someone said, and definitely wasn't me, that most conversations today are people with an exchange of monologues. Like, I want to share whatever, I've been doing this or that, or brag about this or that, or get something off my mind. And I'm just waiting my turn for you to shut up so I can speak, and I want to be listened to. But yet I don't want to listen to you. Maybe social media has done that. But part of that flow state that is so necessary, that I really feel sort of the Zen of investigative journalism, is you're talking to someone, and if you're open and you're really listening to what they say, you may have your next question ready, but if you listen to what they say and are open to all the visual cues and stuff, you have to drop that question. You have to go with where they're going and see where that takes you, because you may find that the entire basis of what you're asking are your preconceptions about what this case involves are completely wrong. And you're only going to find that if you can really listen to what the person is saying and adjust to what they're saying and follow that up. And the flow of information is the same way, but you really feel it the most in a conversation with someone. And a conversation sometimes is like martial arts. I've done Aikido for years, and I'm terrible at Aikido. I'm really abysmal. And I did Wing Chun for many years before that. But there is these moments of almost tactile sense where, okay, here is the opening, here's the punch. You don't have time to consciously think that in your head, but you recognize like this moment, this is where, this is the chance. And in order to have a flow with someone, you have to put aside your ideas of what things are and where things should be and what you think they're going to answer is going to be. And you have to drop the questions. You have to drop the script.
Putting the right steps and processing and arriving with intention, but being open enough to not allow that intention to blind us and pick out bits of information that support what we thought we wanted in the first place. I imagine in journalism that's ever so critical.
Yeah. You think that you know. And a lot of times people, and police do this as well. You learn, you create a scenario and you make the facts fit the scenario. And that gets you into a lot of trouble. That's why people get convicted for crimes that they didn't commit. And as a journalist, you can't do that either. You have the bits of information. Sometimes you're misled. You have the conclusion. And if you try and make the facts fit your conclusion, you can go seriously wrong.
Do you want to help others unleash their performance? Do you want an internationally recognized accreditation to stand out amongst the crowd? Or do you want the playbook I use every day when helping professionals to be their best and find their flow when it matters most? If this sounds interesting, join others who are training to become a high-performance coach. We are on a mission to train a fellowship of expert practitioners and coaches to work with us and help make the world a better place. To find out more, go to flowcoachingfederation.org and check out the Flow Coach accreditation today. I'd love to talk to you about this idea of the Satori and the Buddhist term for awakening. And it reminds me of Aristotle's work of discovering your diamond and uncovering your true nature or your true self, and live with it. And I'm wondering whether having this philosophical outlook and discovery when you're in isolation and in a temple is somewhat easier because there's less noise around you, but I guess it's somewhat avoidant in other terms. Living a career as a journalist, does that help you more towards that place of awakening, or takes you further away from it?
Oh, it takes you more awakening. I believe that some of the Zen masters have said, there are many stories like those lines, but if you can't put it into practice in the real world, then it's of no value at all. Like, anybody can be a Buddha if there's no one else around, because there's no one to get angry with. There's nothing to desire. There's no one to envy. All the foibles and sins that we can commit in the world are almost impossible to do if someone isn't around. It's the ability to control your anger like a charioteer controls their chariot at a time when you have a reason to be angry. That is the true marks of a certain enlightenment. Now, in Zen Buddhism, there are two different schools of thought. There's the Rinzai school, which is famous for these impossible riddles, like what is the sound of one hand clapping? You solve this riddle and meditate on it for years, and when you reach this sort of intuitive conclusion, then you achieve a kind of satori. Whereas in Dogen Zenji's school, Soto's Zen Buddhism, is that basically the teaching is that when you are actually meditating, when you are essentially in a flow state, that is when you are enlightened. That is when you are Buddha. But if you're not in that state, then you are no longer enlightened. So it's like, it's not something permanent. You don't achieve it and then you're enlightened for the rest of your life. You have a great realization, I think would be the term. And that elevates your wisdom and your ability to understand the world. But if you don't keep up the practice, if you don't meditate, you lose that, which is the concept, I think, in the West, is that like you would, show me your original face before you were born. Suddenly you understand what that means. And then for the rest of your life, you live blissfully and have a smile on your face like the Dalai Lama, and nothing phases you, and you are incredibly wise. That would be nice, but it doesn't seem to work that way. You do have realizations as over practice and time that, like, oh yes, it is true that, but because I want the things that I don't have, and I'm not satisfied with the things that I do have, that this is a great deal of suffering comes from this. Now, philosophically, you can understand that, but then there's some days you just have this realization. And then there are experiences through, separate from the practice of Zen Buddhism, things where you just realize that when you realize that, oh, I am mortal and I will die, just like everyone else. The fact of not being dead makes you feel wonderfully happy. But until you've experienced something where you've really been that close to dying, it never really dawns to you that, actually the happiness and contentment, the bar is pretty low once you've had enough experiences with mortality and extremity.
Yeah, it's really, with a lot of people I work with, we often spend a little time meditating on death because it really gives that perspective to life. And we ordinarily don't value the time of each day and the moments before us. And going back to what you're saying before, I think for most people, we've been born into, for the majority, dysfunctional families by modern terms, but in past terms, probably quite good families and behaviors and thoughts. And so we wake up in the morning with our kind of conditioning and our head and our programming, and then to find that awakening throughout the day, whether it comes easily or whether we've got to work at it or whatever rituals we may have to finding it, I think is a really interesting path for all of us to have.
I think it is really true. And I think that a lot of people we're obsessed about our past and our childhood and all these things. And you're right, by many perspectives, maybe we had parents who were slightly inattentive, but compared to parents of the past, we were incredibly blessed. We don't see that blessing part. We just harp on the negative part. But while Zen Buddhism and stuff talks about the original self and this person who you were before you were born, what the real teaching there is that what you find is the Dhammapada is we are as we think, and so we become. We make ourselves. Like, we are responsible for being the people who we are. We may have had a shitty childhood. We may have had abusive parents, but how we react to that and how we grow from that and what we learn from that, that's on us. So we become the people that we are now. And that is the person that people like. It's not some sort of abstract, perfect you that's there. It's you are the person you've decided to be. You make yourself. And that's also a big realization. It's like, oh, you can't blame anybody. It's you. You make the decisions. You determine it. And that ability of self-determination is also something that's also a realization. It's like, oh, I can control my temper. Like, I can stay calm. I can do these things. These things are within my control. There are many things that are not with it that I cannot control, and I can't be blamed for those. And that sense of within my own dominion and my own mind and my own behavior, I am the master of myself. That gives us sort of Buddhist-like calm or Buddha-like calm when you attain that state.
And empowers us to live and do how we want to do things, which brings me on to your writing. I've written a book and academic articles, but I always look in awe of journalists because you've got a timeline, and it's normally ASAP, if not hours. And rather than my process has more been like a curation of editing. Are there things that help you get into that flow where you can just sit down and the words just seem to come out effortlessly, and you look at the text and you're like, great, I'm happy with that.
Yes. So, you cultivate rituals and things, but the worst thing is, right, the most challenging thing as a journalist is there is breaking news related to something you know nothing about, and you have very little time to write about it. And in that case, to get into the flow, the first thing I do is I look up an encyclopedia entry on it. If I don't know the fair, it's like you immediately go macro. What is the big picture? Then you go to this picture. Then you read everything that has been written about it so far, or if nothing's been written about it, you try and look for something similar that has been written in the past. So you get an idea of like, how do you frame this story? Now, I've been doing this for like 25 years. So I have an idea. History repeats itself. So when Prime Minister Abe resigns, like I know what's going to happen next. I know the procedure. And then of course I've been following that story. So what I do to get myself in that state is I take a deep breath. I jot down a couple thoughts that I have, and then I think a second about what is the structure, what is the entry point, how would I end this story with what I know now? And sometimes I work backwards. And what is very interesting about modern journalism is working for a Japanese newspaper, it's who, what, when, where, how, and why. And why is the last thing that you write about, because often you don't know why. But with a publication now, for whether it's the Daily Beast or the Los Angeles Times or Zaiten, or like a Japanese publication, you have to draw in the reader. You have to be innovative and interesting, or no one will read past the first paragraph. And each one of them has their own style. I mean, if you read the Daily Beast, the Daily Beast has a certain style. It's very different from the Los Angeles Times. So you have to have these personalities in your head. Like, this is my Daily Beast voice. This is my Japan Times voice. This is my Asia Times voice. Sometimes I cover for the Times of London, which is rather stodgy, but does allow a certain amount of restrained British wit, certain amount. And you assemble your materials. If there's anything been written about it previously, you read through that as fast as you can, and then you jot down what are the major points. And this is how I do it. I do it in pieces, then I assemble it all together. Then I read it once through to make sure I'm not repeating myself. And then I go. And often the process of writing something is finding the way to start and the way to end, and then making it connect through the middle, or building the very bare skeleton. And after you built the skeleton, adding on bits here and there until it's a complete thing, depending upon how much time you have.
Fascinating. Yeah, because you're approaching as well such a new subject with so much new information. Having that structure and getting that backbone helps to add clarity and purpose to what you're writing.
We were talking about how we don't really, about meditating on death, or how you have people meditate on death and stuff. And I've covered horrible crimes for years and years, right? As a police reporter. But, sometimes I think it was very late in this game that I realized that what you write actually can save lives. And it can also cause people to lose their lives, not because of your intention, but because of what you've written. And this comes to mind because yesterday I ran into a police officer from the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department who is now who I knew when I was covering the drug squad in like 2000, from 2002 to 2005, who is now doing security work on the set of Tokyo Vice, right? So here's this guy that I met 15 years ago when he was a real cop, and now he is doing security on a TV series based on something that really happened, except now he's not a cop, he's a security guard. But we were going over this case, and because it was an unsolved case, we both remembered it really well. And basically, it was that there was a drug dealer in Roppongi, which is another red light district in Roppongi, another red light district in Tokyo, who had been mixing heroin with the cocaine that he was selling. And people were overdosing on it and dying. So I think we had 7, 8 deaths. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department didn't want to announce that it had happened because they were worried it would ruin the investigation. And by the time that I realized that people were dying in the area because of drug overdoses, they had pretty much stopped. So one of the people that overdosed was a Canadian who was the head of Pfizer Japan at the time. So big names. And one of the other people who became a break in the case was an Australian who was working for Goldman Sachs. So I want to scoop, right? It's a big story in the sense that there's foreigners, powerful foreigners and famous people in Roppongi buying cocaine and dying of overdoses. But it had stopped. So I made a deal with his boss that they would give me the scoop and I would share information that I had, because it's a lot easier to get information out of foreigners working in that area if you're a foreigner yourself. And that was all going swimmingly, right? We had an agreement. When they made the arrest, I would get the scoop. But then, I think around May 9th, 2 more people fell unconscious into a coma from the drugs, because apparently they bought the drugs but kept them for a rainy day. And so at this point, I went to my boss and I said, look, we have to write this story, because if we don't write it, whoever bought those drugs and still is holding them, they're going to take them and they'll probably die, because it's a bad batch of cocaine. And I went to the head of the division and I said, look, I'm going to write this story. I know that I said I would wait till the arrest, but you know who he is. You have an arrest warrant, and there are people who are still in possession of this coke. And if they take it, they're going to die. So there's a good chance that they might die. And I have to write it now, because clearly this is still happening. And he was furious. He was like, you're going to ruin the investigation. We're never going to catch this guy. And I'm like, this is where you and I have a different opinion on things. My job ultimately is to inform the public. And this is now a public health matter. While drugs are a terrible thing, I don't actually think they're really a terrible thing, but whatever. I mean, that's his whole reason for existing. He'd say, well, drugs are a terrible thing. They're not a death penalty offense. And we can't let people die because they were dumb enough to buy bad coke or had enough money to buy it in the first place. So he wrote the story. It was on the front page of the paper. And I got banned from the detectives' press conferences and briefings for like 3 months, which is what the police do to you when you piss them off. And I was asking this cop who was friends with the division chief, is he still mad at me? And he's like, yeah, he's still mad at you, but he understands that you did what you had to do. And while writing that article, I think saved lives. I was kind of careless in sharing information with another reporter who named the stockbroker who had taken the cocaine and fallen into a coma. And I found out that 2 years later he killed himself. And I was like, wow, okay, that's not my bad, because I didn't name the individual in my article, but because I was careless with the information and somebody else wrote it up and it ruined this guy's life so badly that he saw nothing else to do but kill themselves. I was like, yeah, that's really awful. Everything that you write has repercussions. And I think ultimately probably more people were saved than the person who just chose to kill themselves. But, writing is a very serious business. And I think that when I found that out in like 2006, it was one of the first times I go, wow, what telling the truth without being very careful of why you're telling it or the importance attached to it can ruin people's lives. Made me a little more reluctant to write scandals. You don't need to name someone who overdoses on drugs, even if they're a famous celebrity. I don't see the point. Maybe the public has a right to know, maybe they don't.
Do you find that significance of your words and the potential impact that they might have something that helps you get into a deep state of focus? Or do you feel like it's a distraction and you're worried about what you might write?
Most of the time, if I have a sense that writing this does more harm than good, I have the luxury now of not doing it. I'm just like, no, I'm not doing that story. And that's a good place to be. I mean, I am freelance. And sometimes I barely have enough money to pay the rent. Like, you might think that with the TV series being under development that I would be loaded. You would be seriously wrong. But it's good, because from the very beginning, I'm not going to touch a story in which I feel that it's not worth writing in the first place. And most things that I write about, I don't have to face that moral dilemma. A lot of stories, a lot of what I write about these days is current events and political scandals and social phenomena. And most of the time, I feel like I'm doing more good than harm, certainly. And I have written stories over the years that I felt had a positive effect on the formation of Japanese law, especially the laws relating to human trafficking, and even a revision of Japan's sexual assault laws, which were very weak to begin with. So, I feel like I've definitely contributed to making the society I live in a better place. But as time goes by, I also am more aware that the pen can heal and it can also kill if you wield it poorly.
I'm curious as to how you've responded in some of the greatest difficulties or failures of your life.
Well, like anybody, difficulties and failures. I mean, I've gone through periods of bleak, deep depression, I think, as everyone does when things go wrong, poorly in their lives. And probably what was just a terrible, terrible year for everyone. In 2011, there was the Tohoku earthquake and hundreds of thousand people died, over 100,000 people died, I believe, or maybe not 100,000, maybe 15,000 people died. The Fukushima nuclear reactor melted down. You couldn't get into Japan, and I was out of Japan at the time that happened. And I came back bringing supplies, toilet paper, diapers, essentials to be taken to the stricken areas, because the United States had plenty of those things in Japan, so it was in short supply. But when I got home, the first thing waiting for me were results from my very expensive physical, and the results were that I had liver cancer, a 3.6 centimeter tumor in my liver. So I immediately started treatment for that the next week. And because it was so close to a major artery, I also had to get chemotherapy. And, the irony of having liver cancer after writing about this ruthless asshole Yakuza boss that made all these deals to get himself a new liver and had survived wasn't lost on me. And at the same time, I couldn't really be angry or curse the heavens because I smoked like a chimney and I drank all the time. So it wasn't any mystery to me. I remember sitting in my room, looking at the results, smoking a clove cigarette and thinking, oh, well, this shouldn't be a surprise. And I handled that poorly. I just kind of went crazy. I smoked more, I drank more, even while I was getting chemotherapy. But just sort of, fuck everything. And what probably saved me is that I started writing again. I started writing for the Daily Beast. And then I also realized there are worse things than the Yakuza. The Yakuza are terrible, right? They're parasites. They're a very clear and present evil, right? You can see the harm that they do on people, that the extortion, the fear they strike in people, the violence they use to get what they want. But I realized that there are also worse things, and that was the Tokyo Electric Power Company. That was the politicians that let them get away with nuclear accidents and sweeping it under the table for years and years. The people that ignored all the warning signs that the Fukushima reactor was going to melt down. And with a new cause and a new enemy and something to write about that had nothing to do with organized crime, I sort of reinvented myself. And that was a good thing. I'd have to say that the last time I was seriously depressed was, my best friend, who also became sort of my girlfriend, had leukemia and she didn't survive. It was 2012. Like I said, 2011 was one horrible event after another. And that sort of sent me into another depression. But by the end of 2012, I don't think I've been depressed ever since. I think it's okay to be sad about things. I mean, I could have handled cancer a little better than I did. At least I didn't tell anyone except my father and just dealt with it. I felt like that was the easiest thing to do. I didn't want to burden my kids because there's nothing they could do about it. And
what helped you out of those times of depression? What's got you back to feeling the joy of each day?
Well, with cancer, at one point I was just I think one day I was working on an article for the Daily Beast and down on the balcony to smoke. And I just realized, okay, you might die, maybe you'll die and maybe you won't, but no one is trying to kill you right now. No one really. You're in reasonably good health. You might survive, and you've had a good life. You've done all the things that you wanted to do. you have enough money put away so your kids can go to college. I did at the time. You've written a book that you always wanted to write. And so the worst thing you can say is you didn't have as much time as you would like. So just fucking get over it. And that was a voice in my head, like, yeah. So I started meditating again. I went to see my Zen master. I hate to say that word because he's such a goofball. It's kind of hard to think of him as a Zen master. And just had a nice talk with him and put my will together and hoped for the best. And then it worked out. When my friend Michelle died, at some point I realized I have every reason to be sad. Somebody I've loved who's not going to be around anymore. It seems very unjust for someone who just turned 30 to not make it to their 31st birthday, especially when I'm older. But I realized that she left me a very nice note. And I realized she would never want me just to be moping around and be sad all the time, because that's not who she was. She was someone who handled leukemia, and she had leukemia 3 times. She kept getting reoccurring leukemia. It's a really rare condition. She had 3 bone marrow transplants, and she was never depressed. And I was like, if I can't deal with this as well as Mimi, then I'm a total failure as a human being. And that helped. And then I realized it's just going to take time. Yes, I'm going to be sad. And missing people who aren't there and wanting to be with someone who you can't see and feeling sad about it, that's okay. That's a natural reaction to things. You just have to let it play out. And in time, it did. Around the period where she passed away and around the period was her birthday, I would get really depressed. And every year I still think about her at those times. But I didn't want to be numb, and I didn't want to take, antidepressants or anything. It's just like, that's a fact of life. And it's okay to miss people and mourn them. The problem with getting older is there's more and more people to mourn, but you have to it's almost like a meditation exercise. Like, oh, I am feeling sadness because the person I loved I can't be with, and I will never be with them because they're not coming back. But sometimes it's a different way of looking at it. It's not like they're really gone, they're just not here.
Sounds like an amazing mix of self-love and tough love to heal and to re-engage with your own life. Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Are you looking to improve your performance, stress less, and flow more? Do you want to improve the human performance in your organization or team? If so, we are here to help. Our team of experts specialize in helping individuals and businesses integrate a high-performance practice and culture. So if you want to take your performance to the next level, or integrate the lessons and skills you hear on this pod into your leaders and teams, go to flowcenter.org today, the official site of Flow Training and Flow Coaching. I've got some quick fire questions.
Shoot.
For you. What are the 3 pillars do you believe have given you a foundation for your success?
Curiosity, perseverance, compassion. If you're not curious, you don't learn. You'll laugh. This is so ridiculous. When I was looking for jobs, I was in Kabukicho, like 92. I kept the printout, and there was a fortune-telling machine, like a tarot card fortune-telling machine in the middle of Kabukicho, like in a game center. And you could ask it for like love luck, life luck, work luck. So I chose work luck. And the printout came, and what it said was, you are blessed with a morbid curiosity. This incredible morbid curiosity you have, if you harness it and keep your antenna out and keep seeking information, will give you great power, and fortune will be on your side. And the word in Japanese is yajiru makonjo, which is kind of, with the best translation, is morbid curiosity. And it was true. Because I want to know, because I have to know, because I am interested in understanding things, that motivates me to study. And the more knowledge you have, the better you are able to take the facts that you're given and move to the next step. So curiosity is incredibly important. Intellectual curiosity, morbid curiosity. Perseverance is also really important. I wasn't good at Japanese. I wasn't the best in my class, but I just kept hammering away at it like almost brute force, like a really crude computer hack, like again and again and again and again. 3 hours in the language lab, 3 more hours in the language lab, sentence pattern drills until it was in my head. And the last one is compassion. Is if you don't feel like journalism is a hard profession. If you don't care about the world that you're in, or other people are making making the world a better place, or understanding why people do the things that they do, then you burn out. That compassion is a huge motivator, and those are the 3 pillars of my success, my limited success in the world that I'm in.
And what book or film has had a huge impact in your life?
One of the books, it's also a film, but that had a huge impact on my life, was The Hustler by Walter Tevis. Now, Walter Tevis you'll hear his name recently because The Queen's Gambit was made into a really great Netflix series, right? Which everybody's watching, the one about chess. But Walter Tevis wrote a book about a pool hustler. I think his name is Fast Eddie. I think Paul Newman plays him in the movie. And the point of the book is that most people sabotage themselves on the verge of success. Meaning that it's easier to fail than it is to win. Most people don't really want to win, because once you win, once you have what you want, then you've got to worry about losing it. Then you've got to keep it. Then you've got to fight off challengers. It's much easier to be a loser. And so most people, when they're on the brink of success, screw themselves up. And that book, which is also really a well-written character study, I realized, I've come very close to self-sabotaging myself many times in life, like walking away at a critical moment. And that book comes to mind. It's like, no, this isn't the time to fold. Let's see where this goes. As far as books, I guess actually the book that has had the most impact on my life that I read and made, there's 2. One was the Dhammapada, which is a book of like 22 chapters. It's a collection of sayings by the Buddha, by the historical Buddha. That's very profound and very well written. And it has some very beautiful chapters about, it's full, it's very dense, but it has some of my favorite verses like conquer the liar by truth, conquer greed by generosity, conquer hatred by kindness, the evil things in the world with their positive counterparts. And I remember reading that book, and the opening verse is, all that we are is a result of what we thought. It's founded in our thoughts, and it's based on our thoughts. And, for 14-year-old me was this like realization, like I am who I am because of what I have done, because of what I think, because of what I've just chosen to be. Like I'm making these decisions. So I'm not something that's created by the world. I am the person that I've determined who I want to be. And the second is the Tao Te Ching, which is very esoteric, but it does have some of those great contradictory passages like, he who speaks does not know, he who knows does not speak. It also has a very wonderful philosophy of learning to be content with the way things are and enjoying the presence and the flow of things and simplicity. Those 2 books occupy a very sacred place on my wall. I mean, I like those books quite.
Well, Jake, thank you very much for your time. So much, such a great conversation, from sharing headphones with the Dalai Lama to meditating on death and so much more. So thank you very much for your time.
Oh, yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure being on.
Flow Unleashed.
I found this chat with Jake really interesting, which is why I broke it out of the vault. I find it fascinating and admirable when people have a particular quest and have the courage to weather the conflict that comes their way and continue to engage with the journey. There are 2 main takeaways for me. Firstly, addressing and resolving conflicts require an enormous mental and emotional strength, which is why many of us try to avoid it. Typically, when facing conflicts, we either move away, flee the situation and to avoid the risk of loss and social embarrassment often, relying on others for resolution. Or we fight it, perhaps adopt a position of power to quell the opposing argument, often double downing on our points of view. Or placate and give in the hope of making everyone happy, preserving relationships in the status quo. And these responses are very normal and natural. However, these reactions are also adaptive behaviors, removed from an emotionally mature adult-to-adult response. Jake, through his professional lens, has instead learnt to approach these conflicts in a very adult-to-adult, mature manner. If we want to follow our dreams and not be derailed by rising conflict, we need to find a way to hold our ground and remain open and curious during the conflict in an adult-to-adult, mature manner. And we can do this by first clarifying the conflict, by talking through each party's stance. For example, what I'm hearing is that right? Is this what you mean? Is there an upside or downside to this impasse? These phrases don't mean that you're compromising or changing your view. It just means that you recognize that most disagreements are multidimensional, and miscommunication is often the main issue in conflict. It also goes a long way to showing your intent to understand their position, unlocking their protective response. Then we can look to reframe or refocus and redirect the conversation to a positive end. Use the conflict as a springboard to find common ground or a win-win. For example, it's clear we both really care about the situation, which is great. Is there any aspect that we can agree upon? Or do we share an outcome that we are all happy to walk away with? In this manner, we can take the discussion away from no, don't, can't, won't, away from the you versus me, and into a place of opportunity and collaboration. It is often during this engagement with complexity, be it two partners talking or two political leaders talking, that empathy and compassion has a chance to shift perceptions, reduce the emotional temperature of the conflict, and find a way through the complexity. Once we take charge of our communication and adopt an intellectual humility, there is often a contagion or ripple effect that occurs with those in the room. My second main takeaway from Jake's journey is about his transition from being a Zen Buddhist priest to embracing the challenging life of a journalist. It's both inspiring and thought-provoking. By following his passions, even in the face of conflict, financial instability, and discomfort, Jake forged a path that ultimately rewarded him. Those same passions became a source of resilience, pulling him through some of the most difficult and discouraging moments of his life. He's an example of the power of aligning passion with the greater good. And when these two aspects can align, we create both a deep motivation and meaning to our focus, which creates purposeful action. I wonder how you can continue Jake's journey and align your passions with the greater good and embrace the rising conflict to evolve your own human performance. If you want to find out more about Jake, please see the show notes. Thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed. If you enjoyed listening, please subscribe to get notified when our next episode drops. The more people that subscribe, the better I can make the show for you. Equally, please leave a review. Your review will go a long way to helping others find this pod. Until the next time, thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed.